It is Troy with Royal Focus. Time right now to catch you in with Matilda Lloyd, who is from Bailiwick Legal, and of course they're a corporate member of the Triple R network. Matilda, good morning there to you.
Morning, Troy. How you going?
Not bad. How are things there with the team at Bailiwick Legal?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Very busy with all this Aboriginal cultural heritage.
Yes, I know that you and Phil were at Katanning on Monday. How'd you find that?
It was a good forum. Live export was the first topic of the day, and then we delved into Aboriginal cultural heritage. As you can imagine, quite a few people had concerns, but no, it was a good forum, and I think it was a good chance for everyone to get out there and discuss the issues of the day.
Yeah, it looks like people are ringing through already. Speaking of Aboriginal cultural heritage, how do people know if there is Aboriginal cultural heritage, say, on their property, Matilda?
So previously there was the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Register, but on the 1st of July that was replaced by the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Directory. Now that's a mapping system that's available on the Department of Land's Planning and Heritage website, and essentially allows you to put your address in and search your property to see if there's any Aboriginal cultural heritage listed on there.
All right. So what do people do if there is, say, Aboriginal cultural heritage on their property?
So under the new legislation, any proponent wishing to undertake activities on land has to undertake a due diligence assessment, and that assessment process is essentially about determining whether there is Aboriginal cultural heritage on your property and the risk of harm to Aboriginal cultural heritage. So that due diligence assessment looks different for the different activities that you're doing. The new Act essentially categorises the activities into 4 areas. You've got exempt activities, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Now those activities are really classified according to the level of ground disturbance. Tier 1 sort of your low minimal level of ground disturbance, Tier 2 is moderate, and then Tier 3 is sort of more significant ground disturbance. I suppose an example would be if in the farming context, establishing a new farm or putting in infrastructure that hadn't previously been on that piece of land.
All right. And how do our listeners say if they get this, how do they undertake a due diligence assessment?
Well, the first step for all due diligence assessments, regardless of the activity, is to actually look on the directory, to undertake a search. And once you've undertaken a search, it's then a case of which activity tier you fall into. If it's an exempt activity, all you have to do is determine whether it's an exempt activity and whether there's a protected area on the property. If it's a Tier 2, for instance, you then have to undertake further searches. So if there's any reports or surveys listed on the directory, it's about reviewing them to confirm whether there's any Aboriginal cultural heritage. There's also a requirement if there's uncertainty to consult with the local Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Services. And if the activity cannot be undertaken without risking a harm to Aboriginal cultural heritage, then a permit may be required.
Speaking of permits, when is a permit required?
So permits are just really required for Tier 2 activities. So if there is Aboriginal cultural heritage or a risk of harm to Aboriginal cultural heritage, a permit will be required. That differs to a Tier 3 activity, which requires an Aboriginal cultural heritage management plan, whereas Tier 1 and exempt activities don't require approval if there is no risk of harm to Aboriginal cultural heritage.
All right. Are there any penalties, say, if people harm Aboriginal cultural heritage here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The penalties have increased quite significantly since the previous legislation. So the penalties are based on the level of harm. So if there's serious harm caused to Aboriginal cultural heritage, then an individual could face imprisonment of 5 years or a fine of $1 million or both.
All right. And I'm sure that you and Phil and the team there are getting plenty of phone calls about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely causing concern for landowners, but also for contractors that are operating in, rural areas, but also, in the hills out of Perth where you've got blocks that are, bigger than 1,100 square metres. So, yeah, it's affecting a lot of people.
If people want to know more with you and the team there at Bailiwick Legal, how can they do that there, Matilda?
Absolutely. So they can contact Phil or I at the office. Our contact number is 9321 5451. You can also just search us up. All our contact details, email addresses are on our website.
So for our listeners out there, you may have a question on what is going on with this Aboriginal cultural heritage, whether it's on your property and what do you need to do and everything else. Just to double check, do get in contact with the wonderful team there at Bailiwick Legal today, 9321 5451. Matilda, thanks for your time on Rural Focus today.
Thanks,